My brother showed up at my door on a Thursday night with my nephew's dinosaur backpack in one hand and a carry-on suitcase in the other. And the first thing I noticed wasn't the suitcase. It was the look on Emmett's face. 8 years old, standing on my porch in the November cold, with his coat unzipped, staring at the welcome mat like it was the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. Not shy, not tired, just somewhere else entirely. "Conference in Phoenix," my brother said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Last minute. You know how it is." He handed me a thin envelope with $100 cash and a sticky note with his new girlfriend's number on it. "Ingrid's on call if anything comes up. I'll be back Sunday." I started to ask which conference, which company, but Todd was already walking back to his car. He gave Emmett a single pat on the shoulder. The kind of pat you give a coworker's dog. And got in. The taillights disappeared around the corner before I even had a chance to say goodbye. "My name is Callie. I'm 34 years old, and I've been a registered nurse for 9 years. Which means I spend about 60 hours a week surrounded by people in crisis. I know what it looks like when someone is holding it together by a thread. I knew it. The second Emmett finally looked up at me, his hands balled into fists at his sides, chin trembling just barely enough that a stranger wouldn't catch it. "Hey, Bug," I said, "you hungry?" "Aunt Callie," he said. His voice was this thin, careful thing, like he'd been practicing the sentence in the car the whole way over. "Dad didn't get a conference. He's trying to take my mom's money before the court finds out." I stood there on my own porch in the cold for a full 3 seconds before I could process that. "Come inside," I said. "I'm going to make you some hot chocolate." He didn't argue. He just followed me in and sat at my kitchen table with his backpack in his lap, still holding it, like it was the only solid thing he had. Emmett's mom, Sandra, died 19 months ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in February, gone by October. She and Todd had been divorced for 3 years by then, but she'd never remarried, never moved far. She lived 12 minutes from my apartment, and she used to send me Christmas cookies every year, even after the divorce. Because she said, and I quote, "You're not the one who cheated, Callie. Don't look at me like that." I loved Sandra. Emmett looks just like her. Same dark eyes, same serious face that breaks into this enormous, ridiculous grin. When something actually hits his funny bone. I hadn't seen that grin since the funeral. Sandra had set up a revocable trust before she died. $340,000, her entire savings plus the life insurance payout, held in trust for Emmett until he turned 21. Todd was named as the initial trustee because at the time of the paperwork he was still Emmett's primary custodial parent, and Sandra's attorney had recommended it as the practical choice. There was also a provision naming Sandra's sister, my former sister-in-law Bev, as successor trustee if Todd ever became unable or unwilling to manage the fund properly. What Bev had figured out, and what she'd filed a petition about 3 weeks ago, was that the trust was being drained. Emmett pulled a beat-up tablet out of his backpack. One of those cheap Amazon Fire tablets, cracked screen, still had a Minecraft sticker on the back. Sandra had bought it for him the year before she got sick. "Mom put it in my bag before she went to the hospital the last time," he said, setting it flat on my kitchen table. "She said, keep it safe and don't let Dad reset it." I never did. I sat down next to him. He opened the Photos app. The first thing I saw was a screenshot of a text conversation, taken by a kid who'd apparently been sneaking pictures of his father's phone screen for months, small and blurry but readable. Todd and Ingrid, back and forth, talking about wire transfers. Talking about an account in Emmett's name at a credit union, 3 states away, that Todd had apparently opened 18 months ago, 6 weeks after Sandra died, without telling anyone. There were 9 months of screenshots. I went through all of them sitting at that kitchen table while Emmett drank his hot chocolate. By the time I got to the end of the folder, my hands had gone completely cold and I was doing the math in my head without even meaning to. 2 transfers in December, 1 in March, a big one in June, another in September. Total somewhere north of $200,000, moved out of the trust into accounts that had nothing to do with Emmett's welfare, his education, his medical care. The monthly statements from the trust account, which Todd was legally required to maintain and which Bev's attorney had subpoenaed, would show a fund that looked like someone had been quietly bleeding it out for a year and a half. The court hearing on Bev's petition was in 68 hours. I put Emmett to bed in my guest room with every light in the hallway on, because he'd mentioned, quietly and matter-of-factly, that he didn't like the dark anymore since his mom died, and then I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee I didn't drink and thought about my brother. Todd is 4 years older than me. When I was 19 and completely broke and working double shifts at a Walgreens to save up for nursing school, Todd co-signed my first student loan. He drove 4 hours to help me move into my first apartment. When I went through a terrible stretch in my late 20s, bad relationship, bad year, the whole thing, he showed up at my door with Thai takeout, and we sat on my couch and watched bad action movies until 2 in the morning, and he never once made me talk about it. He's my brother. He's my blood. I love him the same way I love my own heartbeat. Automatic, without thinking about it. And he was robbing his dead ex-wife's 8-year-old son. I called my colleague Jess at 11 o'clock that night, because Jess has been navigating a custody situation for 2 years and knows more about family law attorneys in this county than I ever wanted to. She gave me a name immediately. Nina Okafor, Family Law, specializes in trust litigation and child welfare cases. She's aggressive, Jess said. In a good way, call her. Nina picked up her cell on the second ring despite the hour, because apparently family law attorneys develop a sixth sense for the kind of call that can't wait until morning. I told her everything in 12 minutes, talking fast, my voice only cracking once. She was quiet for about 15 seconds when I finished. The hearing is in less than 3 days, she said. If Emmett doesn't have an advocate present and the petition fails to clear the procedural hurdles, your brother's attorney will argue that the petition lacks standing and push for dismissal. In the meantime, your brother presumably thinks he has until Sunday to finalize whatever transfers are still pending. That's correct, I said. Send me everything on that tablet tonight. Every screenshot, every image, in the highest resolution you can manage. And don't tell your brother you know. Don't change anything. If he texts you, respond normally. He's expecting me to just keep Emmett busy and not ask questions. Good, she said. Let him keep expecting that. At 11:47 p.m., Todd sent me a text. How's he doing? 3 words. No punctuation. The kind of text you send when you're not actually worried about the answer. I sat there looking at it for a long time. My hands weren't shaking. I don't know why I expected them to be. He's great, I typed back. Already asleep, have a safe trip. He sent me a thumbs up. That was it. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, going through the tablet with Nina on the phone, walking her through every file, every screenshot. Emmett had documented things methodically in that quietly serious way he has. The same way he does his homework. The same way he helped Sandra sort her medications during the months when she was too tired to do it herself. He was 8 years old and he had understood on some instinctive level that what he was seeing was wrong and that it needed to be saved somewhere. His father couldn't find it. He's a remarkable kid, Nina said at one point, and I had to put the phone down for a second because my chest just tightened. Yeah, he is. The next 36 hours were the strangest of my life. On the surface, everything looked completely ordinary. I took Emmett to ICHOP for breakfast. We went to Target and he picked out a Lego set. We watched 2 movies. I made him grilled cheese for dinner, both nights, because it's the one thing I reliably know how to cook well. And he ate 3 pieces each time without being asked, which told me something about how regularly he'd been eating at home. He didn't talk much about his dad. He asked me twice, in this careful, sideways way, whether I'd talked to the lawyer yet. The second time I told him, yes, she was handling it. And he just nodded and went back to his Lego set. And I had to look away because I was not going to cry in front of this child. Meanwhile, Nina and I were building a case at the speed of emergency. She tracked down the credit union account Todd had opened. It was technically in Emmett's name, but with Todd as sole signatory. A setup that a good forensic accountant would blow apart in about 40 minutes. She filed an emergency motion to consolidate our intervention with Bev's existing petition. She contacted the trust's original attorney, a woman in her 60s who'd worked with Sandra, and was absolutely furious when she understood what had been done with her client's estate. The forged authorization forms, Todd had apparently signed Sandra's name on 2 amendment documents that were filed 8 months after her death, which is physically impossible in any court in the country. We're going to be Exhibit A. I kept waiting to feel something I couldn't name. Doubt, maybe. The voice that says, maybe there's an explanation. It never really came. Because every time I started to rationalize, Todd had debt, Todd had pressures I didn't know about, Todd was struggling, I'd hear Emmett's voice. Dad isn't at a conference. He's trying to take my mom's money before the court finds out. An 8-year-old figured it out. An 8-year-old had been carrying that knowledge alone for months, protecting a cracked tablet in a dinosaur backpack, like it was the only thing standing between him and losing the last thing his mother left him. I thought about what Sandra would say. I thought about those Christmas cookies. And then I stopped thinking about it and went back to work. The morning of the hearing, I drove Emmett to the courthouse in downtown, and we sat in Nina's car in the parking garage for a few minutes before going in. He was wearing a navy blue sweater I'd bought him the day before, because none of the clothes in his backpack looked right for a courtroom. He had his hands folded in his lap, and he was staring straight ahead through the windshield. "You okay?" I asked. "Is Dad going to be mad?" he said. I had about 100 answers ready. Practical ones, protective ones, the nurse in me wanting to diffuse and reassure. But Emmett was 8, and he'd earned a real answer. "Probably," I said, "but that's not going to change anything." He looked at me, just for a second. And then he nodded, picked up his backpack, and got out of the car like it was any other Thursday. The courtroom was the kind of cold fluorescent room that makes everything feel both very serious and very beige. Todd and Ingrid were already there, sitting at the respondent's table with Todd's attorney, a man in a good suit who looked like he charged $400 an hour and had billed Todd for the full ride, presumably with money that had come from somewhere he shouldn't have touched. They were talking quietly, relaxed, comfortable. Todd had his hands folded on the table in front of him, and the expression of a man who has already run the numbers and liked the result. Then the doors opened. I felt it before I saw it. The way the room changed. The way Todd's attorney stopped mid-sentence. I was watching Todd when he turned around. I watched his face go from confused to pale in about the time it takes to exhale. Ingrid grabbed his arm. She said something I couldn't hear from across the room. Todd stood up. "Callie," his voice was different, thinner. "What are you? Why is he here?" "You were supposed to." "I was supposed to watch him," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected, carrying in that particular way voices do in courtrooms. "I am watching him." Nina stepped forward before Todd could say anything else. Emmett stood next to me, chin up, holding his backpack straps with both hands. The judge called the session to order. Bev's attorney and Nina had coordinated their filing the night before, and within 20 minutes the courtroom had shifted into something else entirely. Nina laid it out piece by piece. The unauthorized transfers, the fraudulently amended trust documents bearing a dead woman's signature, the credit union account opened in an 8-year-old's name without any fiduciary oversight, the 47 months' worth of records showing Todd's systematic dismantling of the fund that Sandra had spent the last year of her life putting together. The judge didn't interrupt much, he read. His expression, which had started out professionally neutral, went through several changes that I don't think he was aware of. Ingrid made it about 12 minutes before she turned on Todd. I don't know exactly what she said, because it came out fast and low, and the bailiff moved toward them. But I caught the phrase, "You told me it was legal," and that was enough. Todd's composure lasted about 30 seconds after that, before he started talking over her, and then they were both talking over each other. And then the gavel came down and the room went quiet. The way a room goes quiet when someone with authority has run out of patience. What the judge said next, I remember word for word, because Nina repeated it to me, later in her car in the parking garage, and I wrote it down in my phone so I wouldn't forget. He said, "The conduct documented in these filings represents a fundamental betrayal of a child's welfare and of this court's trust. This account is frozen effective immediately. The trustee designation is revoked. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential charges under California Penal Code, Sections 503 and 532. This child is not going home with either of these individuals today." Todd's attorney asked something about appeal rights. The judge told him he could file whatever he needed to file. Then he looked at Nina and asked who was petitioning for emergency temporary custody. Nina looked at me. I said, "I am." I'd been sleeping on 4 hours a night for 2 days. I was still in the same blazer I'd worn to work on Monday. I probably didn't look like anyone's idea of a stable legal guardian. But I'd said it out loud in a courtroom in front of a judge, and it was already the truest thing I'd said in years. After that, things moved both very fast and very slowly, the way they always do when lawyers are involved. The trust was placed under the management of a professional fiduciary, a court-appointed firm with no connection to anyone in the family, pending a full forensic accounting of every transaction since Sandra's death. Todd and Ingrid were released, but both were required to surrender their passports. Todd's attorney assured him the DA might not pursue charges. Nina told me later, she'd given that about a 15% chance of being true. The temporary guardianship order came through 11 days later. Emmett's social worker, a quiet woman named Miss Fowler, who'd been appointed by the court to assess placement, sat across from me in my living room for 2 hours, asking the kind of questions I hadn't expected to be ready for. About my work schedule, my finances, my plans for his schooling, whether I understood what I was agreeing to. I answered everything honestly. Toward the end, she asked Emmett if there was anything he wanted to say. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "Her grilled cheese is really good." Miss Fowler wrote something down in her notebook, and I got the sense it was not related to grilled cheese. The spare bedroom used to have a daybed and a half-finished canvas I'd been meaning to paint for 2 years. Now it has a twin bed with a comforter Emmett picked out himself, dark green, some kind of geometric pattern, and a bookshelf that's already overflowing, and a poster of the solar system that took us 40 minutes to hang because neither of us is any good at measuring. His school backpack hangs on the hook by the door every night and is gone by 7:15 every morning. And sometimes, when I get home from a long shift, he's at the kitchen table doing homework, and he looks up and says, "Hi," in this completely ordinary way, like this is just what we do, like we've always done this. His laugh is exactly like Sandra's, big and sudden, like it surprises him every time. Todd is facing 2 counts of breach of fiduciary duty and 1 count of elder and dependent adult financial abuse. Emmett's status as a minor trust beneficiary falls under that statute in California. Ingrid cooperated with the DA's office in exchange for reduced exposure. The forensic accounting firm is still working through the records, but Nina estimates they'll recover most of what was moved, minus legal costs. The trust won't be what Sandra intended, but it won't be gone. I think about her sometimes when Emmett's asleep and the apartment is quiet. I think about the fact that she put that money together, knowing she was going to die, knowing she couldn't protect him herself, trusting that the legal structures she'd put in place would hold. She couldn't have known they wouldn't. She couldn't have known that the one crack in the wall would be the person she'd once trusted enough to have a child with. But she'd put that tablet in Emmett's backpack. She'd told him to keep it safe, and don't let your dad reset it. And an 8-year-old had listened to her, and that was the thing that couldn't be erased or transferred or hidden in an account. 3 states away. I did the scariest thing I've ever done when I walked into that courtroom. I had absolutely no guarantee it would work. I just knew I couldn't look at that kid and be the person who looked away. Standing up to your own family is not the same thing as not loving them. I spent a long time thinking those two things were in conflict. They're not. I love my brother the same way I always have. I also walked into that courtroom and I would do it again. Family is not an obligation to stay silent. It's a decision you make every day about who you're going to show up for. If you found out someone close to you was hiding something that was destroying a child's future, would you risk everything to stop them? Or would you tell yourself it wasn't your place? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know.